Today in 4.4, using corresponding parts of congruent triangles, or otherwise known as CPCTC. So, if you know two triangles are congruent, so far we proved that two triangles are congruent, then we know every other corresponding part is also congruent. So in this video, I am going to be going over two proofs. You want to make sure to write these down because these proofs could be on a quiz or test. Make sure to write down both proofs in today's video. So when I'm looking at my proof, my first statement and my first reason would be my given, and the reason is because it's given. So before I want to prove or can prove that these two side lengths are congruent, I want to prove that these two triangles are congruent. So if I look here now, I have my two angles as shown in the diagram. And now as I look at this picture, I see that I have an overlapping side. So if I have an overlapping side, I can say BC is going to be congruent to BC, and that would be the reflexive property. So I'm going to write that in on my picture. Now I have to use the picture to help me draw out that the two triangles are congruent. So I'm going to say triangle KBC is congruent to triangle. Since I started with K, I have to start with A because those are the two triangles that are congruent, or angles are congruent. And then I had to go to the angle that has the 1 dash because that's what I did for the first one. So it would be CB. And the reason why those two triangles are congruent is as I trace out my picture, I have an angle, and then I have another angle, and then I have a side. So it would be angle, angle, side. So now that I proved that the two triangles are congruent, then I can say any other corresponding part is congruent. So using your congruent statement, I can state any corresponding part is congruent. So now I know KB is going to be congruent to AC, because if I look at my congruent statement, KB and AC are in the same spot. And the reason why I could say that is because corresponding parts congruent in your triangle. So CPCTC. So corresponding parts congruent triangle congruency. So that would be all for this proof. Now this one's a little bit more complex. I have to prove that KQ, this line right here, is bisecting JP. So bisecting means cuts it into two parts. So that means those two parts should be congruent. So I first have to say, before I can say bisects, that these two lines are going to be congruent. So, but my first step in any proof would always be my given statement. So I have a pair of parallel lines, and I have two sides that are going to be congruent. So when I look at this picture, I also have an X. Right here's my X. Whenever I see an X, I should always have vertical angles. So I'm going to say angle. KMJ is going to be congruent to angle PMQ. And those are the two angles at my X. And then whenever you have parallel lines, you always have to look at your Z. My reason for that would be vertical angles. So when I'm looking for my Z here are my two parallel lines. So this right here could be my Z. So I can say that angle KJM is going to be congruent to angle JPQ. And the reason because of that is because that's my Z, or my alternate interior angles. So now I have this angle and this angle are congruent. So now if I look back at my picture, I have three things that are congruent. So I can say triangle. KJM is congruent to triangle QPM. And the reason why, if I look at my triangle again, when I trace this out, here I have a side, and then I have an angle, and then I have another angle. So I'm going to say the reason I can do that is because of side, angle, angle. Now remember when I said bisects, I had to first say that these two lines are congruent. And since I know those triangles are congruent, I can state that the lines are congruent. So I can say JM is congruent to PM. And again, that's the same as in my corresponding parts in my congruence statement. And the reason why is CPCTC, corresponding parts in congruent triangles of congruency. Once I know those two segments are congruent, then I can say that KQ bisects JP, because the definition of bisects means it cuts it in half, or it makes two congruent lengths. So this would just be definition of bisect. Make sure to fill out your Google form and submit your answers. Have a great day.